Thanks. Greetings and a very warm welcome to you all. Thank you for joining Global Peace Studies for Sustainable Development in Africa, where we discuss pertinent issues of peace and sustainability around the world and across Africa. I'm George Mutalemwa on behalf of the Africa Peace and Development Network, MAMA. Today, we are looking at structural peace among the Maasai. And the speaker is Professor Donna Pido, an anthropologist who has taught at several Kenyan and American universities in Kenya. I remember her great presentation on this platform about identifying a fractal paradigm in the disruption of peace 3 years ago. And Donna has always been with us, and we thank you so much for that. So please join me in welcoming Professor Donna Pido.
Thank you, George.
Thank you. And we are going now to start sharing the screen so that
the title slide, yes.
Right.
For everybody's information, I can't figure out how to share my screen, so George is doing it. And we're starting with the title slide, which is the title slides, Maasai Social Structure and Peace Creation. And I think this follows from a conversation that we all had several weeks ago about how people tend to fight each other, and the rest of us are trying to find solutions that will make people live together in peace and cooperation, and that never seems to work. And I realized that in Maasai tradition, peace creation or peace is created structurally by the social organization. We can go to the next slide. So I want to go back in history because we don't have a calendrical or chronological starting date for when the Maasai began, but we do have clues in the historical record that tell us about things that people did a couple of thousand years ago that were Maasai-like or similar to the Maasai. And the first one that you see here on the left, that's Herodotus. And he tells in the 5th century BCE, Herodotus tells us about an Egyptian delegation to the king of the Ethiopians. I think we all know that the Ethiopians are East Africans. Aesop was an East African slave in Greece. So the king of the Ethiopians chided the Egyptians because they stupidly ate grain and vegetables, yeah? And he admonished them to eat only boiled meat if they wanted to have a long and healthy life. Now, I hope that most people know, if not, I'll say it, the Maasai traditionally do not eat vegetables or hunted animals. They only eat cattle and simply prepared, and they drink blood and milk for their sustenance. So here's the king of the Ethiopians in the 5th century BCE saying, how come you guys are so stupid? You eat vegetables, don't do that. Just eat boiled meat. So fast forward, we don't know who those people were, the Ethiopians that they're referring to, but they were acting as Maasai have acted in the last 500 years. We have then, fast forward to the 600s of the Common Era, a Chinese historian described how you traveled from the East African coast to the inland communities. And he talks about recruiting porters at the coast and paying them in strips of cloth, and then marching inland and meeting a community of people who did not eat any of the 5 grains, but they pierced the necks of their cattle and drank the blood. Now, I think this is not the historian. This is a portrait head of a Chinese somebody or other. So I stuck it in just for lack of better alternative. So the idea of piercing necks of cows and drinking the blood and drinking milk are very, very Maasai, but they are also common among many other ethnic communities in East Africa. Next slide, please. So now I show this image every time I give a presentation. This is a painting on the tomb wall of an Egyptian official of the 18th dynasty. That's the 1300s BCE. And it shows a procession, a rather lengthy and complex procession of offering bearers. It's the five guys at the upper left and the lady standing behind them that I want to call to your attention. They are dressed exactly as Turkana dressed today. And I took out the picture of Turkana because Odot showed that when he gave his presentation 2 weeks ago. But we see people who are dressed very much like Maasai, who have bouffant hairdos, who have ostrich plumes coming from the center of the top of their head. And there's a giraffe there that they're taking to Huoi, who is the Egyptian official. And I want you to note the mixture or the combination or the simultaneous wear of spotted goat skins and cloth. Woven cloth was around in the 1350s BCE. It's still here, and at least into the 1960s, Maasai were conflicted, as were the Turkana, over whether to wear skins or cloth. So we've got a 3,000-year plus gap that we can't account for because there are no written historical records, and us literate peoples are very dependent on written records. I would like also to call your attention to the 3 cows that you see in this picture, 2 of them on the far left and one sort of almost in the middle of the first register at the top. These are cattle with big patches, big irregular patches of black color on a white ground. A singular of this cow that we see on the far left is a was enkiteng. That's in Maasai. Was is the name of the pattern. Enkiteng is the word for cow. The plural of was enkiteng is was inki. Now, anybody who's here from East Africa knows about the Wasingishu Maasai, the Maasai people who have a lot of was cows, and about Wasingishu. Nowadays, it's not a district anymore. It's got a county. Wasingishu County. We cannot say that there is a continuity either in these people's dress or their ornaments or their hairstyles or in their preference for this very beautiful cow. We don't know if that's continuous. What we do know for certain, because we have pictures and we can see them if we walk out of our compound, we know that the people in 1350 BC looked very much like the people of the 20th and 21st centuries. Let's go to the next slide. Now I'm showing you a political map on the left of Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, and Ethiopia and Somalia. That shows the boundaries, and it shows on the political map, it shows a little model of Mount Kenya, almost in the center of Kenya. On the right, is the relief map that shows, you can see Lake Victoria in the lower left there, which is where I live on the North Shore. And then you see in Kenya, a lot of highlands. Most of Maasai land is in those highlands, often at the lower levels of the highlands, but raised above 2,000 or so feet at least above the flat surface of the rest of the country. All this stuff that you see between Lake Turkana and Lake Victoria and between Lake Turkana and the coast, that's all pretty flat land. And it's hot, dry, and it is a grassland savanna. Gene Brown used to say, East Africa has islands of highlands in a sea of plains. So this is what we're looking at. And let's go to the next slide, because the geography here has affected the way people can or must organize themselves. On the top here, I say environmental marginality, fickle climate, disasters both human and animal, resource poverty, sparse and scattered water sources are the geographical characteristics that distinguish East Africa. And here, the picture that you see on the right is an image shot by Duncan Willits in the 1980s of the Maasai structure of the universe. We have the dark blue sky, which the Maasai define as black, and the black aspect of God lives in that black sky. And then we have the red earth, which is dry and inhospitable. The God in the black sky loves the Maasai, and so he took a strip of skin one day and stretched it down from heaven to earth and sent these animals that you see, the upper line of animals are cattle. The cattle were a gift from Enkai Narok, the black God in heaven, to the poor people of the earth. But he did not take away the animals of the earth. You see a herd of zebras there, almost in the foreground. So the Maasai were enjoined to turn away from the earth, to shun, the animals of the earth, including bees, and to just live on the animals that God had sent on the strip of skin from heaven. So the black eyes were wild animals and God's gift of cattle. The bovographics get to a point where recovery is impossible, and that's something that I want to elaborate on a little bit. If you have ever lived through an East African drought, you know that Maasai people are very sensitive to the percentages of loss, and that if you get into an 80% loss situation, you are likely to die. And I know this because I experienced an 80% drought in 1984 going into 1985, when people were terrified and when the wild animals began dropping dead. When there's a drought, if you see a dead wild animal, guess who's next? You are. Maasai are extremely sensitive to percentages of loss, though they don't express them numerically as other peoples do. So we're seeing a perfect image of the grassland savanna. And one thing that the Maasai know, because God told them, is you do not break the surface of the grassland savanna. You do not dig, you do not plant, you don't do anything like that. And at the bottom of this slide, I have some text that says, I don't know why this meeting info thing is here, that says, survival in the East African grassland savanna depends on minimizing risk and percentage of loss. So you want to spread your risk over as many people as you possibly can and keep down your percentage of loss. That means maximizing herd numbers and keeping the animals alive by harvesting blood and milk while consuming meat very sparingly, very economically. You can drink all the milk you want and drink blood when the cow is ready to give blood by piercing the neck. But you don't eat milk, if you don't eat meat, unless you have to, unless there's a ceremony or some occasion to do it, because eating meat means you have to kill the cow. And you can't afford to kill a cow, because if next year is a drought and it goes like to 80% or whatever, you're dead. Next slide. And now we Americans know something about what happens when you mess with the surface of the grassland savanna. It's called the Dust Bowl. In the late 1800s, the American government allowed dirt farmers to pioneer in the Oklahoma Territory and parts of Texas and Kansas. And by 1930-31, there was a drought and all the topsoil blew away. Some of it got as far as Greenland. It's in the Greenland glaciers, and it's in the ice sheets of Northern Europe that probably have melted by now. But what you see that looks like smoke or fog here is actually soil. So I must tell you that one thing that the Maasai are not is stupid. And it didn't take them many centuries to learn that you can't fool around with the grassland savanna. And and now we have to consider neighboring communities in East Africa, the Somalis in particular, who are known for their irredentism. They attack everybody else. And I suspect that that is because they lost their two most important food sources when they adopted Islam. They lost carrion and blood. They cannot eat a cow that drops dead on the road, and they cannot drink blood. If you can't do those two things in East Africa, you're finished. Now, did I say anything about the peninsular Arabs? We'll get to them. Next slide, please. In defining themselves as Maasai, it is clear that sometime before the 1700s of the Common Era, they made a cohesive set of conscious, well-informed, and consensual decisions, which they ensconced in cosmology, social organization, praxis, and sanction. What's interesting to me about that is that arriving here in the 1960s, I learned immediately that the Maasai don't have brains. There was some question as to whether Black Africans can actually form thoughts or not, and the British believed that everybody was inferior to them. So there was no point in trying to find out why the Maasai did anything the way they did, other than to say the Maasai are stuck in their ways and they never want to change a little bit. They're not susceptible to innovation. That's not true. The system is rigid, but with built-in provisions for the circumvention of its own rigidity. And Maasai do that every single day. The pillars of the Maasai system are corporation or corporateness, exogamy, endogamy, depending on what group you're going to or coming from, seniority, handedness, and color symbolism, mostly red, black, and white. In fact, entirely red, black, and white. So now we'll look into those a little bit. Next slide, please. Over centuries, Maasai developed a belief social system enshrined in their religion, action, and practice. The system requires change at regular intervals. So we know that when the British and the missionaries tell us that the Maasai are resistant to change, we have to just think quietly to ourselves, but then why have to introduce change at regular intervals and on particular occasions? It also establishes a certain peace. The change that is required also establishes a certain peace among Ma speakers. If you know you have to change, you know you have to be ready for something different. A system of resilience and required change that has enabled their survival for at least 300 years of recorded history, probably longer. Unlike the endogamous clans of the Arabian Bedouin and the sharply bounded clans of the Somali, Maasai get along across clans. They're not, in Arabia, they'll kill you if you're the wrong clan. And the Somali don't even consider members of other clans to be human. Others mitigate, but other peoples, other than Ma speakers, mitigate but deny mitigation. Maasai include mitigation and resort to alternatives as part of their belief system. In Maasai culture, nothing is unmixed. Nothing is unmitigated. Next slide, please. None of this could have been the product of a single mind, as I realized one day when I was talking to a Maasai colleague, Patrick Dicker. I said, Patrick, they didn't just make this up, and this wasn't just one person. We have neither the names nor, and he said, I said, they knew exactly what they were doing. And he said, and he pounded on the table and said, they knew exactly what they were doing. We have neither the names nor the images of the people who did this. It is very intelligent and based on long-term sound observational data. So we say, well, the Maasai didn't have writing, so they couldn't record data. They could, they did, and they put it to, they operationalized the data that they collected, whether it was a generation or 20 generations, we don't know. Did the people now known as Maasai figure it out? Did they learn it from their predecessors? Did they absorb the predecessors? Were they absorbed by the predecessors? Nota bene, the predecessors aren't there anymore. Nobody's left in Maasai land but the Maasai. They did not possess the technology we call writing. They were both non-alphabetic and non-pictorial. Who knows? They're all gone except the Maasai. We don't know what happened to the others. Next slide, please. But Patrick Dickett and I know that the Maasai are very smart people. So we can create some very schematic diagrams of the social organizational measures the Maasai put into place to maximize stability and cooperation. Oh yeah, and peace. And along with peace, the stability of the surface of the grassland savanna. So we can look on the left here at a diagram that my husband drew. This is about the center and periphery. The white circle in the center is the Maasai pastoralist center of civilization, of culture, of knowledge, of understanding. And it is surrounded by varying degrees, which he has represented as a purple band around the white center, of polluted Maasai or mitigated Maasai, the Samburu, who hunt wild animals and broke crops. Can you believe that? The Parakuyu and several other Ma-speaking communities are grouped in that purple ring. They're still Maasai, but they're not perfect like the pastoral Maasai. And then there are the surrounding communities, the green spots that you see, that are in varying degrees of pollution and incorrectness and defect. And those are all the Bantu groups and the Karenjins and the Wazulu, anybody who comes along who does not have cattle, doesn't try to have cattle, and who does not do as the Maasai do. In the center of this slide, you can see a schematic drawing that I made for my doctoral thesis of the various sections of Maasai, and we'll talk about them in a minute. On the right, you see a grid of 15 squares. That is a schematized version of the grazing territories that the Maasai came with to the area now that is South Central Kenya. If we look at the drawing in the middle there, you can see little boundary lines and little images of cattle of different colors. Those represent the cattle preferences of between 11 and 15 sections. So now we're getting into endogamy and exogamy. The sections, which are geographical and which are drawn from particular grazing areas, are endogamous. You marry within your section. So these 15 little squares that we see on the right represent sections, and the people inside those sections marry inside those sections. I would like to call your attention to the farthest on the left little black and white cow that you see just above the Tanzanian border. That's a Was-Enkipeng, and that territory now is called Uasin-Gishu. I keep saying district, Uasin-Gishu County. They were previously between Mount Kenya and the northern border of present-day Maasai. But when the British arrived here, it was on the heels of two epidemics, an epidemic and an epizootic. The animals had died off from rinderpest and the humans had died of smallpox. So the British got here, and of course they needed an excuse to kick everybody's butt. So they said, this territory is uninhabited, even though they could tell they're agronomists and animal husbandry people could tell that it was a sweetened pasture that they were looking at. And so they said, there's nobody here. And they took the land into the White Highlands. Later on at independence, when the Uasin-Gishu Maasai got their land back, they were moved over to the far far western periphery of Maasai land. That's just an example of how history manipulates but patterns remain the same. So they're still called Wasingishu. And if you talk to a Kalenjin, who are relatives of the Maasai, but definitely imperfect, they will say, oh, Wasingishu has a lot of meanings. No, it doesn't. It means black patched cows with a white fern. Next slide, please. So we're seeing various ways of representing. Now, what happened was that the Maasai, in their migration to the south and west, found themselves facing a 3,000-foot high escarpment. And when I say 3,000-foot high escarpment, it's just a wall, 3,000 feet high. It's the most vertical cliff that you will ever see in your life. It's called the Kerio Escarpment, and it bounds the Kerio Valley and the Wasingishu Plateau. When the Maasai reached the Kerio Escarpment, they said, hey, wait a minute, we can't do this all at once. Let's figure out what we're going to do. And that was at a point when they decide what to do about their geographical variation. So they said, okay, we can be territorial in our division of grazing territories, but we cannot have any single clan only in one territory. So they made 5 clans, or they acknowledged 5 clans, and they put all 5 clans in all 15 territories. So wherever you go, in whatever territory you find yourself in, whether it's Purko or Wasingishu or Ilovikalani, anywhere in Maasai land, all the 5 clans will be there. So if I'm associated with the Purko people, and my clan is Molelian, so I'm a Molelian Purko, and I can go anywhere in Maasai land and find another Molelian. Not another Purko, because they're only in Purko section, but I can find another Molelian. And that Molelian is required to help me as a clansperson. You see the purple circle in the center of this cluster of 5 clans. That is the 6th clan, the Lysa clan. About 300 years ago, some Meru religious practitioners broke into Maasai land. They found their way into the center, and they said to the Maasai, look, you don't have any priests. You don't have any religious practitioners, so we're going to be your religious guys. And they became the Lysa clan, who are the Libons. Libons are medical religious practitioners revered by the Maasai. So we have 6 subdivisions across 15 sections of the Maasai, 15 or 11, depending on how you count. Now, on the lower left, you'll see a grid that it's colored in beige, and each little square is divided into 4. This is a very schematic representation of neighborhoods. Whatever territorial section you go into, you will find that geographically it is divided into neighborhoods. And I don't even know the Maasai name for a neighborhood, but they're there, and the people know the boundaries of the various neighborhoods, and you can stay in one or move to another, but you need to know that they're there. Now, on the right of this slide is a square with a series of bands of red, blue, dark blue, light blue, red, light red, dark blue, light blue. And this represents the flow of population over time. If we go to the bottom of this square of bands, you can see the dark blue represents the first circumcision, the right-hand circumcision of warriors who become, when they graduate and become senior warriors, they are replaced in juniorhood by the light blue band. The new guys, after a break of, I think, 2 or 3 years, a new circumcision forms, but it's the left hand of the first group. So we have, starting from the bottom, we have right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, of circumcision groups, which form warrior cohorts. Cohorts meaning people who were all circumcised within the same 2 or 3, maybe sometimes 5-year period. The other thing that happens is as you pass from junior warrior to senior warrior to junior elder to senior elder to retired elder to living ghost, your status in the community changes, and it's bounded by birth and by participation in the circumcision cycle, and graduated throughout time. So what happens is that you have like these guys at the bottom, the dark blue and light blue, they alternate with the dark blue and light blue band, 2 registers above them. So one is the right hand of warriors and the other is the left hand of warriors. And I'm going to give a story illustration with that in a minute. So what we have now is a breakdown or a division, a subdivision of the entire Maasai society into units that overlap each other and abut upon themselves, one another, geographically and socially. And that is how the Maasai have maintained their internal peace, because you can always find somebody who's a clansman or a circumcision mate or a neighborhood mate or a section mate or whatever. It doesn't matter if you're in Loitokitok or Seattle. If you're a Maasai, you can find somebody to whom you are obligated and who is obligated to you by virtue of age, time of circumcision, original geographical area, neighborhood, whatever. I hope that's a little bit clear. Next slide, please. So the results and implications for peace are that you can always find somebody with whom you have an affinity and with whom you share obligations and entitlements. People are required to help one another according to the lines drawn by Maasai society. You can't go around killing people who you are required to be nice to. And I'm thinking of that in terms of, I don't know if there's anybody here who will remember, but back in the 70s, there was a Turkana rainmaker who had 75 wives, and he spent all day, every day, entertaining the fathers who brought their young daughters to be potential wives for him, because they all knew that if they could marry their daughter to this rainmaker, they would always have rain. You cannot refuse rain to your father-in-law. So he had all these dozens and dozens of wives. You can't kill people that you are required to be nice to and who are required to be nice to you. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, I have a list of 3 stories here. One is about the old Teritoi who came up to me on the street in Remick and asked me for money. And as I was reaching into my pocket to get something out for him, my research assistant grabbed my arm and said, "Don't give him anything. Let his age mates take care of him." And it turned out that my research assistant was a right hand of Ilkitoid. And this man was a Teritoi. And he was of the wrong alternation of age sets going up into age. He must have been over 80 at the time, and I didn't see anything wrong with giving him some money, but he was of the wrong subdivision of age sets in Maasai. So I have these 3 out of order. The first one is, I think I mentioned earlier that my clan is Molelian. I was taken by the Molelian clan in 1982 because I was staying with Molelian people. Many years later, in 1996 or so, Kajiado County Council sent me to far eastern Maasai land. This is, by the way, in far western Maasai land. I was sent to far eastern Maasai land to conduct a beadwork workshop with ladies who were making beadwork for tourists. And I arrived as it became very dark, and the ladies came up to the side of the Land Rover I was in, and I was wearing purko ornaments. Purko is from western Maasai land, and these ladies were Iloitokitok from eastern Maasai land. And they said, "So are you a Samba?" And I said, "No, I'm a purko." And then they said, "Oh, so that's what purkos look like." I said, "Yeah." And then he said, well, okay, they had not established a link with me. So they asked me for my clan because hoping that they would find a link with my whatever my clan was. And when I said Malalian, they all started jumping up and down. It happened that I had stumbled into a village in which there was only one non-Malalian family. So there you have it. So they took me in right away. There was no question about my acceptance in that community because I shared the same clan with those ladies, even though they could see that I'm not a Maasai. So many years later, like 3 or 4 years ago, Odoch and I were working with some friends from UK Konyoki Maasai. And I happened to mention that my clan is Malayan, and they froze. They stiffened and they said, we can't work with you. We don't work with Malayans. We're Lukumai. And then one guy said, yeah, we're Lukumai, but you're a Malayan. We can't work with you, but you're married to a Lukumai. And with that stroke of the tongue, poor George Pido became a Lukumai. That's his clan in Maasai. So we're perfectly legit because the clans are exogamous. You cannot marry within your own clan. So he had to marry somebody who wasn't a Lukumai. He didn't know he was a Lukumai until they realized that they couldn't work with me as a Malayan, and then they just did it. So peace was created by designating Odoch as a Lukumai. Am I making any sense to anybody? So down here at the bottom of this slide, we see an engraving from Joseph Thompson's book, Through Maasai Land, which was published in 1884. And on the right, we see a photograph that I shot of a group of Isinkiki, Maasai young married women, in 1985. And I had this picture for at least 2 years before I noticed the similarity between it and the illustration from Thompson's book. And I use this in lectures to point out that everything has changed, but nothing has changed. And the Maasai still do what Maasai do, and that the Italian consulata fathers complain about the Maasai refusing to accept sedentarization of the Samburu, refusing to become sedentarized, when they're trying to force people into European models of grid-like housing estates, or to do things that why would they do those things? They don't need them. They don't work for them. They're not going to help the grassland savanna or the people who live on it. Now, I think I have, let's go and see if there's another slide here. Oh, there it is. Thanks for listening. Open to questions.
Thank you so much indeed, Donna, for this wonderful presentation. Now we see the light now really about the Maasai structures, and we can feel also that probably we belong to one of those clans. And so thank you so much for this great presentation. And now we welcome
Lillian, George.
Uh-huh. Great. So welcome for questions, comments, and I can see in chat there's some. All right. So welcome one and all.
You can't have been that clear.
It has been very clear. Thank you, Richard. And Chip.
Yes, thank you so much. Good afternoon to you all. Yes, I'm happy to have heard about Messiah and then the map. I want to ask, how do people feel when they proudly um, what is it announce that they are from this clan, this clan, this type? I to me, I belong to, maybe call it Sona, but I hardly feel something when it is mentioned. So I would want to know if they have a particular feel when they say they belong to this tribe, this clan. That they,
This is a complex issue. Can you hear me? Oh dear.
yes, please. Yes, please. I can hear you.
You know, I'm so far outside that I can be anything. And it's easy for an insider to say, well, you're a this or you're a that, because it doesn't cost them anything. It doesn't wreck anybody's life unless I'm supposed to inherit all the money in the whole community just for being a member of that clan. So, and for Maasai in particular, it's easy to bring people in. Now, if my children now decided to run for political office in Maasai land, they would have to be able to prove 5 generations deep. So yes, you are a Malayan. Yes, you are one of us, but don't try to be president. Don't try to get elected to parliament because you're not really. Does that make any sense? So, and there's no, you know, the Maasai have the most unceremonious ceremonies in the whole world. They just go ahead and do whatever they're supposed to do for the ceremony. They just do it. If it's light a candle, they don't care. So there's no exaggerated movement or dramatic posture to Maasai ceremonies. And any Maasai can say, oh, you're a Maasai, just like me. But that doesn't mean anything until it's put to a test. Do you see what I mean? So if you want to say that you're a member of a clan, you can do that because you're the right color. If I say I'm a member of a clan, yes, I am, until somebody wants to kick me out, and then I don't count anyway. Does that make any sense?
Yes, please. Then it means the when it is put to a test, I think in every country it can affect someone. When it doesn't mean anything, it doesn't give certain feeling, but when it is put to a test, as you said, then it means my place to it can also it can affect someone when it is put to test, please. It's not a question, but
yeah, it's a comment. That's pretty important, especially if you have, suppose Maasai, suppose Odoch, my husband, received absolute acceptance among Maasai people, and then somebody decided that I had broken some rule and would have to be kicked out. Where would he go? Is that the kind of thing you're talking about? It's hard to know, and I might as well mention that biologically I am half Iberian. I'm half Andalusian. That's the southernmost province in Spain. My mother was 100% Andalusian, but and I've never been to Spain. But I meet Spaniards who, when I say, "Oh, I'm Spanish," and they'll say, "You are not Spanish." Well, my DNA is. I don't want to say the word bitch, but you can understand what I'm talking about. Yes, I have Spanish DNA. I don't have Spanish culture. Does that make any sense? And if I'm a Malayan, I don't have either the DNA or the culture, but people want to include me. The guy who said, yeah, you're a Malayan, but you're married to a Lukumai, he was finding a way. This is what Maasai do. They find a way to justify doing what they want to do. And they're pretty successful at it. We don't find a lot of warfare going on inside the Maasai community. They're at war with everybody else, but they're not at war among themselves because they have these social mechanisms that force them to cooperate with each other. And by force, I don't mean nasty force. I mean, just, you know, that that's what you have to do. Does that make any sense?
Yes, please. Thank you. I'm so
Yes,
grateful.
it does.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Donna. And let's turn to Chip. Chip, you're welcome.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. So thank you very much, Donna, and very enlightening. And I think I got the answer in your latest explanation. So Odocho was adopted into the Maasai clan system just like you were, and it happened by kind of a voice vote very quickly. And
Not even a vote, just a redefinition for expediency.
yes, but it was accepted by the group on the spot.
Yeah.
So this,
by the way, these were people who I knew in the 60s and 70s before they were born. We have a joke, me and one friend, that I knew him 3 years before he was born because he was named for a friend of mine who I introduced to his mother. He was not the father of the guy, but in other words, there are Maasai, there are members in the Konyoki section of Maasai who I knew 3 or 4 years before they were born.
Yeah,
so
great.
They have a certain, I don't want to say reverence, but a respect for me. And they got into a mess because they couldn't work with a Malayan. So they had to say, well, wait a minute, you're really one of us. You're married to one of us.
Right. So I'm just enjoying this practice of instant adoption or quick creativity and how that facilitates peace, in a very active way.
Peace was created at that moment when they said, oh, but you're married to a Malayan, to a Lukumai. That made peace. And everybody relaxed. You didn't see it, but everybody was stiff as a board and suddenly everybody just relaxed.
Yes. So thank you. I'm appreciating the power of words and what words can do in terms of creating peace.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Let's turn to Peter.
Thank you. Wonderful, wonderful information-filled presentation. I think I have a piece of bar cloth somewhere around here from my cousins who lived in Uganda in the 60s. They were thrown out by Amin. My aunt said he couldn't dance to save his soul, and she knew. But I wanted to remark that you're talking about an immigration system that we could really learn from here in the US. Ours is terribly complicated. Both are forms of a rule of law and not of man. But we have become so petrified and rigid that we're falling apart here. And I'm really clear that this country has lost its democracy, what democracy it had. I was in a meeting with my local regional planning commission, of which I am an official appointee. And we were informed that we will not receive any federal grants if we use words like climate change in the application. This is a kind of coercion that's totally foreign to us, and we have to deal with it. And it's very difficult when the educational system and so forth is subject to defunding arbitrarily by one man. So I don't know, this could be the last time we meet. I wish we were all Maasai.
Peter, I live far away, but I'm with all you guys in America, and I'm so glad I'm not there, but I just wish there was something I could do to help out. We're all powerless, and this is just a disaster. As I tell friends, every night I hope that before I wake up, the angels will come and take some certain people with them back home.
Yes, we wish them well.
And I mentioned this to a friend of mine in New Jersey, and she said, "You too."
But we're not powerless. We just need to address the situation forthrightly. Anyway, this is not what this is about, and I love your presentation and the fact that this is a system that's so old and so functional and so resilient. It's a Darwin said we need diversity in order for a species to continue.
Yeah. But what bothers me about it is the negative press that the Maasai have received over 150 years from the British, from the missionaries, from the foreigners, from the tourists, the tourism industry. And that's a sad thing.
All right. Now, Evelyn and then Janet, maybe. Yes. So, Evelyn, please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I've got two screens up, and that's because my husband and I share an office. And if we're both on a Zoom at the same time, we distort each other. So I'm between two rooms. Apologies. And a second apology, I'm going to actually, Peter, if you don't mind, I'm also going to respond to your point. Unfortunately, I was moving between two rooms, so I didn't get all of it. But first, to the point of the notion that this network might disappear, is that what you're saying? And if so, just what can we all do to make sure that we keep it alive? I mean, there are 25 of us, and can we keep it alive by chipping in or whatever? But we can do that offline. But I would like to say, please let me know what I can do.
Well, briefly, there's no threat to this particular meeting, but it is a structural matter. And what we are doing is antithetical to the developing totalitarian system. So we have to be alert to that. That's all I meant.
Okay, thank
you. Can we
you.
all agree that if something like that does happen, if Peter suddenly gets up one morning and the plug has been pulled on everything by you-know-who, let's all stay in touch. And Peter, do you have all of our email addresses? And you can tell us what we can do. Also, George, tell us what we can do, and we'll do it. For me, as long as it doesn't involve money, because they're coming after my Social Security. Also, I'm not sure I'm going to have that.
We just have to make sure we don't pierce the ground.
Yes. All the goats have gone. Yes.
My question to Don, sorry.
Go ahead.
My question to Donna is, I seem to play the same record each week. My question to Donna is, first of all, I see parallels between what the Maasai are doing and what Julius Nyerere, I believe, tried to do in Tanzania, when every trained civil servant was not allowed to practice in their own region. And that way, the teachers of students throughout Tanzania were being taught by people from another ethnic group, which meant that the ethnic boundaries, not so much the ethnic boundaries, but the communication was facilitated and the humanity was underscored among ethnic groups. Now, George, if I've said that clumsily, I invite you to correct me. But my question to Donna is, I'm still trying to understand how one breaks down the idea that you have this incredible structure within Maasai land, but everybody outside that is an enemy, if I've understood you correctly. And I know that you're saying that one can be adopted, an individual can be adopted, but how does that work on a more social level? Is my question clear? I'm not sure. And first of all, George, if you'd like to correct my comparison, and then Donna, if you wouldn't mind answering the question.
But
well, I think you are. you're correct, Evelyn, because during Nyerere's time, this was a policy that people move from their areas, from their districts, their regions. So like we move from one region to the other so that, all people can feel like we are all Tanzanian. And rather than thinking in terms of ethnic groups, etc. So yeah, thank you.
George, maybe I can chime in with an addition to that.
Yes.
In Kenya, we didn't do it that way. They didn't do it that way. I arrived in 1967, and I found that only people from a certain tribe that was related to the president got good grades in school. They were the only ones who got into university. So what Nyerere was doing was making sure that everybody was leveled as a Tanzanian and a Swahili speaker. So if they came from a part of the country where Swahili was not originally spoken, now they had to speak it there. And so I think that there was great value in doing it that way because it made everybody Tanzanian. In Kenya, everybody's a Kenyan. I'm a Kenyan, but I'm a Kenyan white. I'm a Kenyan so-and-so. And he got his job because he's a whatchamacallit or whatever. And that unfortunately is not very productive when you're trying to be a nation state.
And how can one bring peace in an environment where, again, if you can only be kind to those who are obligated to be kind to you and everybody else is an enemy outside Maasai land, I'm trying to understand how one can broaden the notion of peace building beyond the border of Maasai land.
I would like to understand that too. It's a question. How do we do it? Especially, how do we do it? I don't know.
But sorry, if I may just ask it a different way.
Sure.
Does the Maasai philosophy and culture provide a key to interacting beyond the borders of Maasai land?
Why would anybody do that?
So it's a closed system.
We are humans. We live in closed systems. Yes, it would be very, very nice if we could introduce the concept of being nice to your neighbors. There are some religions that try that. It has never worked yet. So I don't know what to say, but in Maasai land, if you don't do what you're supposed to do, it's a small enough community that you can be gently ostracized. Yeah. Brooklyn is too big. London is too big. So I don't know. I don't have an answer to that at all. I'm just making an observation and showing people that if we can find commonality and say, now we're going to operationalize our commonality and blah, 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 blah. But we are honest, we're how many billions of people now? And everybody knows that people from East Asia are not really human and Maasai's are not really human. And anybody darker than your grandmother is not really human. Does that make any sense? We have internal mechanisms for creating boundaries in order to survive within limited boundaries, and then trying to transcend them becomes difficult. I'm not optimistic. I'm a huge pessimist when it comes to humans getting along with each other. I just don't think we can do it. I mean, not as long as there is testosterone and progesterone.
All right, let's go to Janet, and then we can proceed with that question.
I'm
It's
very cynical,
interesting, for
Evelyn.
sure.
Please forgive me. I'm very cynical. I used to have fights with colleagues. Oh my God.
Janet, would you like to mute your microphone? Or maybe she's actually... talking to
Janet,
somebody.
you're muted.
Unmute. Okay, got it. Because I'm on my phone. So, okay. Thank you so much for Donna. Thank you so much for this incredible, illuminating presentation, because it's very rare to get such insights. For me, like, I'm not in Brooklyn, I'm in Upper Manhattan, but I don't feel so, I'm not from any kind of sense of being detached to the land, which we've spoken about here before. And instead, I'm at the complete other end of the spectrum, which is on working on global civil society. And so there are 2 points I want to make about that. We're constantly in the position of finding ways, finding connections with people we don't know, who aren't like us, who are, have such a different background in culture. And so I think of this play, even though what I think about is not in the play called 6 Degrees of Separation, the person comes and invigilates himself into this family, faking who he is. And but anyway, my point is, when we meet someone new, say in New York or at the UN or on a bus, we try to find ways to feel ourselves connected, even if it's being a grandmother, or it's, oh, I used to live in Chicago too. How do you like that? Or whatever it could be. So, so I think in global civil society or non-intact face-to-face communities, like you're so beautifully describing, and regionally connected communities, we try to flip through possible forms of connections and ways to feel our shared
Yes.
humanity. So then the second conception I want to bring forward is, which I think will help your question, Evelyn, is the concept of the scope of moral inclusion, which is flexible and according to, Japanese who are living in the United States are okay until Pearl Harbor is bombed, and then they're excluded and displaced and not allowed to be part of this citizenry anymore. Or conversely, Africans who were brought here as slaves, we've spent decades, centuries trying to expand the scope of moral inclusion so that they get equal rights to everyone else. So it's flexible and requires a lot of work, though, right? And a lot of generosity of spirit. So I think they're two opposite approaches to the same thing. There are other concepts like buen vivir, like, good feeling, learning to live together. And there's some other ones coming from the UN, not just from the UN, but from global civil society working in the UN to cross borders, across nation states and all their power, and to build a feeling of connectedness, a web of relations. So anyway, those are, I may be the optimist, but I also understand your pessimism. So thank you. I love what you presented, and I wish I could read more, have some way to learn more and more about it. Thank you.
I want to thank you. You've just given me a phrase that I would never have thought of myself, and I'd never heard it before. The scope of moral inclusion. Da-da.
Yeah.
That's terrific, because it's the moral inclusion that made my husband a Lukumai, and made me a Malaysian. And do you see
Yes.
what we need to operationalize that at all
Yeah.
times.
Yes, because also the rigidity with which you describe the body language in that story, rigidity was they were feeling moral exclusion. They were hesitating. And then as as someone, said the magic thing,
Yes.
it's okay,
Yes.
then moral inclusion was reflected even in their body language. So I just love that story. Thank you.
Thank you. That's
Yeah.
terrific.
Oh, thank you.
And by the way, Adriano is a dud.
Okay, here's
Huh?
here's the moral inclusion across boundaries, because actually Donna is also a United States citizen and she and I share the same congressional representative. So we've
And
been
Janet
trying to communicate about that.
wondered why I thought he was so good. He was. His newsletters are terrific, but he's a jerk.
Yes, he doesn't write his newsletters. They're straight down from the Democratic National Committee. He doesn't think we talk like that.
I'm so sorry.
I know. We wish we had hope, right?
Appointment, yes. Oh, mamma mia.
So you see, we really are connected in an amazing number of ways. That's like 1 degree of separation.
Yeah, for people who don't know, I'm from West 106th Street, and Janet is from somewhere off the tip end of
200 West 200th Street in Manhattan.
That's in the solar system.
So we ourselves are operating on this, moral inclusion across boundaries and cultures, and even seeing each other ever in person.
That's true. That's true. And I've never been to your neighborhood. I have. I've been to the cloisters.
Yes, and I'm looking at it right now. The cloister. It's out my window, up the hill.
My rule for America is I don't go north of the cloisters. So if you're from Buffalo, I don't know you. Austin.
Well, when you come to New York, I'll meet you at the cloisters. No pushing you beyond your boundaries. So, okay, let's let other people
talk.
Yes, thank you so much, Donna. Thank you, Evelyn, too, for your question.
Does anybody else have anything to say, or everybody's asleep by now?
No one is asleep, I believe, because this is quite interesting and exciting. When we look at the Maasai, of course, we look at them as members of the, say, Kenya or Tanzania, community. And however, before the boundaries that we have today, that you have Tanzania here or Kenya there, Uganda there, this is quite artificial because it wasn't there before, the Berlin Conference, 1884. So probably the Maasai still think they are a country, So you might actually need a visa to go to their country. So you need to do a few things, so that they can accept you, not because they don't treat you as an enemy, but well, maybe they say you need to prove that you'll be gentle to us.
That's part
so
of it.
I was just
right. Yeah.
Excellent. So we are looking at the structural peace among the Maasai with Donna Pido. And so if you have a question, please feel free to ask. Yes, please, Janet, would you like to say something?
Well, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I would like to connect to Peter's comment, because Peter's comment was on the top-down political power hierarchical model. And how might we as a group connect to this? Donna's model is a very face-to-face, in person, not totally in person, but more or less the examples you gave of peacemaking were person to person, face to face, clan to clan. So how might we connect? I think I'll start by saying I think this model of soft power, which we've been discussing, please, God willing, will help us fight with these terrible people who are in power right now in our country. But I don't know. What do you all think who have more experience with these things?
I don't know what we can do about the people in power in America now, except keep hoping that the angels will come at night.
Mm.
Okay, there is a question from Evelyn and then Peter. Evelyn, please.
Yeah, I don't want to take it in another direction, but something that strikes me is we often hear about the commercial worlds in the sense if we're talking about inclusion, everybody employed by Coca-Cola is included in the corporation. And I'm wondering whether, and given the current situation and the focus on corporate entities and well-being, I'm wondering whether introducing concepts of inclusion in terminology that the corporate world will understand into the corporate world might be a one way of bridging peace and the current context.
Let me just add the word moral inclusion.
Moral, right, moral.
As opposed to structural
Right.
or bureaucratic inclusion.
Right, but
Or-
for example, oh, sorry.
That's it.
For example, remember the early Coca-Cola advertisement, "We are all one." I can't remember the slogan, but they had their big hit. It was a song that was a big hit, and it was all about we are one. So if
teach the world to sing.
exactly, thank you. Teach the world to exactly.
I'd like to buy the world a Coke and keep it company. That's the one you're talking about.
Exactly. So if one could find a way to provide advertisement or other material that combines their need for publicity and our need for moral inclusion. Anyway, I just throw it out as a bizarre idea.
You just have to think about it a lot. We can't just come up with facile solutions right here.
Exactly.
Maybe Peter can. Peter.
Well, this is so appropriate. By the World of Coke, that was not a commercial song, but they hijacked it.
Mm-hmm.
And what they hijacked it into was what Howard Richards called basic cultural structure. And among the basic cultural structures, he names capitalism as, and colonialism. I make colonialism and capitalism and collective trauma all aspects of the same malady, which is killing humanity. And so, if we talk about, the corporate world has just explicitly rejected the idea of introducing inclusion. It is now basis for defunding any federal grants related to DEI, to diversity, etc. And before that, it was already quite apparent that the corporate version of DEI was all window dressing. And of course, the opponents of actual inclusion seized upon that to defeat it. It was a wonderful impulse, diversity and inclusion, and then it was commercialized and made into window dressing, and then it was exposed as a sham and destroyed. And it was destroyed in the space of about this last month, because now it is the excuse to cut off federal funding to libraries, to schools, to NGOs, to any efforts to, and they began by gutting the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act that we fought so hard. We were bloodied. I was bloodied in that struggle. So the pendulum is sweeping across now like a wrecking ball, because the basic cultural structure of greed is seen as natural law. You know, Kipling's law of the jungle, the nature red and tooth and claw. I mean, all this colonial poetry about how it's just God's will that some people eat other people. And right now in Syria, there are 4 million people in the path of a gigantic, massive killing machine. Gaza is flattened. I wrote several months ago that the genocide industry will turn to the southern border of the United States, and it is happening. Let's annex Mexico. All these things become the excuse for a massive killing spree. Now, I'm a pretty optimistic person, actually, and I place about 2014 the change, because we were all so connected to each other at a scale nobody can imagine. But the problem is the connection is owned by the BCS, the basic cultural structure, that nothing is done unless you have investment. Investors control what is done and what can even be thought of to be done. So the machine that connected us all to itself also connects us to each other. You can see the tension there. You can see that we depend on the internet for our lives now. There are surgeries being performed across the internet. There are just millions of people who will die if we turned it off tomorrow. If we turned it off in this hour, there would be a catastrophe. There would be crop failures. There would be distribution of food would cease. International shipping would cease. So we're totally dependent on this thing, and the thing is a privately owned thing. And it's privately owned under a basic cultural structure seen as God's law. That's where we are now. Anyway, don't get me started, because you see what happens.
May I interject something?
Oh, yes, but please connect this to the indigenous wisdom represented today by the Maasai culture, now being connected to all the other indigenous ways and wisdoms across the world. We all personally in this forum know several people who are deeply connected, some of them indigenous wisdom holders themselves. So we're not helpless, but we need to broaden our sense of the battleground, because there is a lot more going on that is not being shouted by the shouting machinery. Okay, I'll shut up.
We humans have exceeded the carrying capacity of our planet for our species, and nobody wants to admit that. And tragic and heart-wrenching as it is, there are too many humans. And I'm about to be rained on, so I'm going to have to say goodbye for a minute until I get into the house, because the rain is coming and I'm sitting outside. We have to anyway, never mind.
Go
I just-
inside and I'll rant for another minute while you're
Yeah,
moving
you keep ranting. Keep ranting. That's good.
because no, we have not exceeded the
Like
carrying
computer.
capacity, and that is the BCS excuse for all the violence.
No,
Their
it's
idea
serious.
is
It's
their idea
numbers.
is if we let about 2/3 of the population of Earth perish, then everyone else can go on using oil and so forth, and they will have saved humanity by this brutal method. This will not work. This is a mental illness, and mental illness, like language, does not occur in individual people. It occurs in this relationship out here among us. That's where the illness occurs. And it spikes. The focus may be acute in one individual. But we are collectively responsible. We have access to our survival as a species. And we just have to learn that because we've never been confronted with it before. Have I said enough?
Not yet, but I hope that Donna will be joining us again soon, as she promised. And they are lucky that it is raining there because it hasn't been raining in many parts of Tanzania. It only started recently, but it has kind of come very, very late. And so probably as a result of climate change, even if some people don't want to hear that we talk about climate change.
Can I compliment that, George and Peter?
Yes, please. Yes, please, Janet.
That I think this circles back directly to Donna's points about how ecologically sensitive and responsive the Maasai are to their land, and how that also is the reason for their moral exclusion, in the sense that they know how this sensitive, a fragile environment, what it needs and what things mean, and they know that they could die easily if it's abused. So they're really protective of their livelihood and their connection to the earth and the animals. So I think that's something that our larger culture, like our larger institutions globally, we have this problem of climate change and climate crisis that contradicts the way many things have been done, like how we use fuels and many great things like getting to fly and visit each other and transport food around the world, except it's all threatened and there's no, our institutions aren't able to respond to this new knowledge and this new challenge. And so one of the traditional oldest humans way is to just go fight and go take what someone else has. And that's what our current president is demonstrating. The most primitive, well, if we don't have it, we'll go take it from somewhere else. So, but I think it's our institutions that we really need to help through our social connectedness that Donna she was so beautifully described. So tell her that later, George, since she missed it.
Thank you. Thank you, Janet. And Donna, can you hear us? Or Odoch?
Hello?
Hello, Odoch, are you there?
Yes.
Yes, please. And can Donna hear us? Talk to us?
Yes. She's sitting in front of my machine. Come and sit here. I'm not that. Just a minute.
Yeah, thank you.
Now you know what's going to happen, George.
Yes, no.
A drop of rain will fall. Now that I've brought everything in the house and disrupted everything, there will be no rain. So continue. Go ahead.
So we are about to finish our webinar for today, but probably there is a question that you could also answer regarding there is a challenge or something that happened that some Maasai people were moved from their area, from their homes to another place because of development. And having talked about maximization of stability and cooperation among the Maasai, I don't know, like whether you are able to speak to some Maasai, and maybe you can give us a sense of what really it feels for them to leave their own home to go to a different place.
When you define a group of people as less than human and less than deserving than others, as has happened to the Maasai, you can do anything you want to them, like the Germans did to the Jews. So the whole idea is Maasai being moved out of their home to other places. That's the Wasinkishu Plateau is a perfect example of that. When the British figured out that they could just say that the Maasai are stupid, primitive savages, and that they may not be capable of thought, and then just gave out parcels of Maasai land to white people who they tricked into moving into this country by showing them places during a good year and then giving them Elbergon. People who don't live in Kenya won't know what that means. That, in other words, there was a manipulation by the missionaries in particular, because the Maasai never converted to Christianity until the 1970s. And that was the work of two catechists, I'm told. I wasn't here then. But the whole idea, as a Maasai friend said to me one day, back in the 80s, she said, well, we never had a religion before the Wazungu came. Yes, you did, dear, but they told you that it wasn't a religion. They lied. And so we have the missionaries jointly with the colonial government manipulating people, telling the Kikuyus that they're better than everybody else, telling the Baganda that because they have a king, they're better than everybody else. And we suffer because we're Acholis. So Acholis didn't have a king. Am I making any sense? So
perfectly so.
Huh?
Yes, you are making a lot of sense. Thanks.
Okay, so there's a manipulation that has gone on that has nothing to do with the people themselves. That's why I keep saying the one thing the Maasai are not is stupid. They can see that this year the rain falls and next year it doesn't fall. So they take that into account and make sure that if you have water in your home and your neighbor across the other side of the hill doesn't have water, he can come to you and get water. Or you can go to him when he has water and you don't have any. So this whole thing about how the Maasai reacted to anything, they're not stupid people. Having said that, I often think they're jerks, but never mind. It's something else. George, did I give you anything that you can think about?
Yeah, definitely, yes. Thank you so much indeed, Donna, and I'd like to thank also everybody who has been with us today. And I can see, some old friends and, coming back here, which is really wonderful. So it's really great. And let's continue whenever you have time. Of course, every Wednesday we are meeting here where Hans once was. Hans visited me once here at home where our studio is. So thank you very much indeed. And I'm looking forward to seeing you all on Wednesday. Then we'll be talking about, somebody from Bradford will be talking to us also about the conference that somebody asked about last week. So all the best. And of course, feel free, of course, to stay behind for some hellos and some conversations after the webinar. Okay, bye-bye.
Yes, we'll have pizza.
Bye, everybody.